Have you ever felt like your life was falling apart? Like everything you thought was secure was suddenly slipping through your fingers? What if I told you that this chaos isn't random, that it's actually a sign that you've been chosen for something greater? There are 7 spiritual tests that only a rare few can endure, trials so intense that they separate those who are merely curious about spirituality from those who are truly awakening to their divine purpose. The question is, will you make it through? The truth is, most people will never face these tests because they are too distracted by the illusions of the world. They cling to comfort, avoiding the deeper questions of existence. But for those who feel the call, these challenges are unavoidable. They are designed to strip away the false self, break the ego, and awaken the soul. And while these trials are not easy, they are the only path to true spiritual transformation. If you've ever felt like your life has been one long series of struggles, you need to watch this video until the end, because what you are going through is not suffering without purpose, it is initiation. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Many of you watch these videos but aren't subscribed yet. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now let's dive deep into the 7 hardest spiritual tests and see if you have what it takes to endure them. There comes a moment in life when the noise of the world fades into the background and a voice, soft yet unmistakable, begins to call from within. This is not the voice of fleeting desires or ambitions shaped by society. It is something deeper, something ancient. It is the whisper of the universe, summoning the soul toward a higher purpose. This awakening is not forced upon anyone. It is not written in neon signs or shouted from the rooftops. Instead, it is an inner restlessness, a silent, persistent question that emerges from the depths of one's being. Is this all there is? For those who are destined to embark on this path, this question becomes impossible to ignore. The comforts of the material world no longer satisfy, and old routines begin to feel hollow. What once seemed important, success, validation, approval, starts to lose its grip, replaced by an insatiable hunger for something more. But here's the paradox. The more one seeks outwardly, the more elusive the answer becomes. The true journey does not begin outside in books or doctrines, but within. And that is where the greatest challenge lies. The spiritual awakening is a test of courage, for it demands the dismantling of illusions. Every belief, every identity, every assumption about the self must be questioned. Who are we, really, beyond the masks we wear? Beyond the roles assigned by family, culture, and society? This is where many falter, for the truth can be unsettling. It strips away false securities, leaving the soul bare and vulnerable. But it is only in this vulnerability that one can begin to understand the profound mystical reality of existence. One of the greatest biblical examples of awakening is the story of Paul on the road to Damascus, Acts 9-3-9. A man so certain of his path, so convinced of his righteousness, is suddenly struck blind, forced to confront the reality that everything he believed was wrong. His world was shattered in an instant, but from that destruction emerged a new vision, a higher calling. Awakening is like that. It is a moment of disorientation, where the old self dies so that something greater can be born. But awakening is only the beginning. The journey does not end at the realization that there is more to life than meets the eye. That is merely the invitation. The real tests come next, shaping and refining those who dare to step forward. Those who answer this call will soon find themselves facing trials that will challenge their very essence. And the first of these trials is the test of self-discovery, a test that demands honesty, humility, and the willingness to see oneself without illusion. The path of spirituality is not for the faint of heart. Once the call to awakening is answered, the first great trial emerges, self-discovery. And make no mistake, this is not the gentle kind of reflection that brings comfort. It is raw, unfiltered, and often unsettling. The greatest illusion humanity clings to is the false self, the carefully crafted identity shaped by childhood, culture, and past experiences. But to walk the true path, one must be willing to let go of the facade and see oneself as one truly is. This is precisely what Jesus taught when he said, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." John 8:32. But the truth is not always easy to bear. To know oneself is to face the shadows, the fears, the insecurities, the patterns of self-sabotage. It means acknowledging not just the strengths, but also the weaknesses, the wounds that have long been ignored, the pride that blinds, and the doubts that whisper in the silence. Many resist this step, clinging to illusions because they are familiar, even if they bring suffering. Self-discovery is not merely about understanding one's personality or past. It is about stripping away the falsehoods to uncover the divine essence within. The world teaches people to define themselves by what they do, by what they own, by the labels others place upon them. But in the grand scheme of the universe, none of that holds true. To truly discover oneself, one must ask, who am I without all of this? Without the titles, without the possessions, without the expectations of others, who remains? The Bible offers a powerful example in the story of Moses. Before leading his people, Moses had to confront himself in the wilderness, Exodus 3:1-12. For years he believed himself to be nothing, a fugitive, a man unworthy of greatness. But God revealed to him a deeper truth. His identity was not found in his failures, but in his divine purpose. Likewise, those who embark on this path must undergo their own wilderness experience, where the noise of the world fades and the soul stands alone, naked before its Creator. This stage is not about judgment, but transformation. When one has the courage to see oneself with clarity, something incredible happens. The chains of illusion begin to fall away, the burden of pretense is lifted, and the soul steps closer to the divine. But this is only the beginning. For after self-discovery comes another challenge, the test of isolation, where one must learn to silence the outside world and truly listen to the voice within. Once the veil of illusion is lifted and self-discovery begins, the next trial appears, isolation. It is here that the soul learns a hard but necessary truth. Silence is not empty, it is full of answers. The world is noisy, constantly pulling attention outward, keeping people distracted, busy, and disconnected from their inner voice. But those who truly seek spiritual awakening must step away from the chaos and enter the wilderness of solitude, where distractions fall away and only the truth remains. This is not an easy test. Many fear being alone because, in solitude, there is nowhere to hide. The noise of the external world drowns out inner struggles, but in silence everything buried comes to the surface. Old wounds, forgotten fears, unhealed pain. This is why Jesus himself sought solitude before great moments of his journey. Before beginning his ministry, he spent 40 days in the wilderness, Matthew 4:1-11, facing not only physical trials, but deep spiritual confrontation. In that silence, he was tested, tempted, and strengthened. Spiritual isolation is not about physical loneliness. It is about detachment from the distractions that cloud the soul. This can manifest as a sudden distancing from people, activities, or even desires that once seemed essential. It may feel like an exile, a season of emptiness where God's voice seems distant. But in reality, it is an invitation to listen, to truly listen. It is in this silence that revelation comes, that divine whispers become clear. The universe speaks in stillness, but only those who quiet their minds will hear. Some resist this phase, seeking comfort in external noise, social interactions, entertainment, even religious routines that become mechanical rather than meaningful. But those who embrace the isolation find something profound. They are never truly alone. Elijah, when fleeing, in despair, believed he was abandoned until God called him to a cave, where he witnessed a mighty wind, an earthquake, and fire, yet God was in none of them. Instead, he spoke in a gentle whisper, 1 Kings 19:11-12. This moment reveals a deep truth. The divine is not found in grand external displays, but in the quiet, patient whisper within. Once the soul embraces silence and recognizes the presence of the divine even in solitude, a new realization arises, detachment. Because isolation is not about loss, but about learning to let go of what no longer serves. And that is the next test, one of the hardest of all. There comes a moment in every spiritual journey when the soul must face one of the hardest truths. Not everything and everyone is meant to stay. Detachment is not a rejection of life, nor is it about shutting oneself off from love or experience. Rather, it is a deep realization that clinging too tightly to anything, whether relationships, beliefs, material possessions, or even past identities, creates chains that prevent true spiritual elevation. To move forward, one must learn the sacred art of letting go. This is why Jesus said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily." Luke 9:23. Detachment is a daily practice, not a one-time event. It does not mean living without love or purpose, but rather holding everything with open hands, trusting that what is meant to remain will, and what must leave will make space for something greater. Many struggle here, mistaking detachment for loss, when in truth it is liberation. The tighter one grips something, the more suffering it brings when it inevitably changes. Spirituality teaches that everything in the universe flows, and trying to control what is meant to pass only leads to pain. Abraham faced this test when God commanded him to sacrifice Isaac, Genesis 22, 1-14. It was not about losing his son, but about surrendering control, trusting that God's plan was greater than his own understanding. The same applies to anyone walking the spiritual path. Sometimes relationships must be released, not because they were bad, but because their purpose has been fulfilled. Old ways of thinking must be shed, not because they were wrong, but because they are no longer needed for the next stage of growth. Letting go is not passive. It is an act of faith, a declaration that the soul trusts the divine order of things. It is saying, "I release what is not mine to hold, knowing that what is meant for me will find me." Those who resist this test often find themselves in cycles of suffering, holding on to what no longer serves them, fearing the unknown. But those who embrace it discover something profound. In losing what they thought they needed, they gain something far greater: peace, clarity, and the ability to walk freely toward their purpose. But there is one test that surpasses even this, a test so painful, so dark, that it shakes the soul to its very core. It is the dark night of the soul, where everything seems to fall apart. And it is in this darkness that the greatest transformation begins. There is a moment in every deep spiritual journey when the light seems to disappear. The universe, once so full of signs and guidance, suddenly feels silent. The presence of God, once so near, now feels distant. This is the dark night of the soul, a period of deep suffering, confusion, and inner desolation. It is not simply sadness or hardship. It is a complete unraveling of everything one thought they knew. And yet this is not punishment. It is purification. Even the greatest figures in Scripture walked through this darkness. Job lost everything, his family, his health, his wealth. Yet in his despair he declared, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him." Job 13:15. Jesus himself, in his final moments, cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27:46. If the Son of God experienced this depth of separation, how much more will those who follow the path of faith? But here's the mystery: God never truly leaves. It only feels that way because the soul is being stripped of all false securities, forced to rely on faith alone. This is where many turn back. The pain is unbearable, and the mind searches for an escape. Some seek distractions, others abandon their faith altogether, believing they have been forsaken. But those who endure, those who sit with the suffering and allow themselves to be transformed, emerge reborn. The dark night is not about destruction. It is about breaking the ego, burning away illusions, and forging a soul that can stand in divine truth. It is the fire that refines gold. Zechariah 13:9. During this time, nothing makes sense. Prayers feel unanswered. The world feels empty. But this is the precise moment when the greatest transformation occurs. Like a seed buried underground, growth is happening, even when it cannot be seen. The mistake many make is assuming that because they feel alone, they are alone. But God does his deepest work in silence. The dark night of the soul is not a curse, it is an invitation, a gateway into a higher level of consciousness, one that can only be reached through surrender. And that surrender leads to the next great test: faith. Because when nothing is certain, when every foundation has crumbled, the only thing left to do is trust. And that is where true spiritual strength is revealed. When the world collapses, when everything once stable crumbles, There remains only one question. Will you still believe? Faith is not tested when life is easy. It is tested in the moments of uncertainty, when nothing makes sense, when prayers seem to go unanswered, and when the universe appears indifferent to suffering. True faith is not about seeing. It is about trusting even in the absence of clarity. It is about stepping forward without knowing where the path leads, relying on the unseen hand of God to guide the way. Abraham knew this test well. He was called to leave everything behind and go to an unknown land, simply trusting in a promise. Genesis 12:1. Later, he was asked to sacrifice his own son Isaac with no explanation. Genesis 22:2. In both moments, he had no guarantees, only faith. And yet, through his obedience, he became the father of nations. This is the nature of faith. It demands movement before confirmation, trust before understanding. It is not about having all the answers, but about knowing deep within that God is faithful, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. Most people struggle with faith because they want proof first. They want to see the plan before they commit to the journey. But faith does not work that way. Just as a seed planted in the soil cannot see the sun yet still grows toward it, so must the soul trust in the presence of the divine, even when it feels hidden. Spirituality is not about certainty. It is about confidence in the unseen, about believing that the darkness will give way to light, not because of what is visible, but because of what is felt. Jesus often challenged his disciples on this very point. When Peter walked on water, his faith allowed him to do the impossible. But the moment he focused on the storm rather than Christ, he began to sink. Matthew 14:28-31. This is the lesson. Faith is not about avoiding fear, but about not letting fear dictate one's steps. It is about choosing to trust, even when fear whispers otherwise. This is why faith is not passive. It is an active, daily decision to believe in the divine order of things, even in the face of doubt. And yet there is one step beyond faith, something even more difficult. It is the ultimate act of trust, the complete release of control. It is surrender, not just believing, but fully letting go, allowing God to take over. And that is the next and final test. Faith may allow one to walk through the storm, but surrender is what allows one to stop fighting the waves altogether. This is the final and most difficult test, because it requires not just belief but total abandonment of control. Humanity is conditioned to resist, to strategize, to hold on. But true spirituality is not about mastering life. It is about aligning with the divine flow of the universe, trusting that everything is unfolding exactly as it should. Jesus demonstrated this in the Garden of Gethsemane. Facing the agony of the cross, he prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." Luke 22:42. He did not resist the path laid before him. He surrendered to it. This is the essence of spiritual surrender, not passivity, but deep trust. It is understanding that the ego's desire for control is an illusion, and that true peace comes only when one releases the need to dictate outcomes. Most people struggle with this because surrender feels like weakness, but in reality, it is the greatest act of strength. To surrender means to trust that even when the plan is unknown, the divine plan is perfect. It is to no longer fight against reality, but to embrace it, knowing that every experience, good or bad, is shaping the soul for something greater. It is no longer saying, "Why is this happening to me?" but rather, "What is this teaching me?" Job, after losing everything, reached a place of total surrender. He said, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Job 1:21. His story teaches that surrender does not mean there will be no suffering, but that, through surrender, suffering no longer holds power. When one lets go, freedom emerges. Freedom from fear, from anxiety, from the need to control what was never meant to be controlled in the first place. And it is in this surrender that the final revelation comes. Everything that was lost, every trial endured, every hardship faced, was never meant to destroy, but to refine. The tests were not obstacles, they were stepping stones. And with this understanding, one awakens not to an ending, but to a new beginning, a life of peace, authenticity, and deep connection to the divine. Now that you've seen the 7 hardest spiritual tests, ask yourself, How many of these have you faced? Have you ever experienced the deep isolation of spiritual awakening? Have you had to let go of people, beliefs, or even your own sense of control? If so, you're not alone. These trials are not meant to break you. They are meant to transform you. And if you've made it this far, it's because you were chosen for something greater. I want to hear from you. Which of these tests has been the hardest for you? Drop a comment below and share your experience. Your journey might inspire someone else who is struggling right now. Let's build a space where seekers of truth can support each other. If this video spoke to you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you're ready for another revelation, click on the next video on your screen, because your journey is only just beginning. This is Celestial Truths, and I'll see you in the next one.